I'm here with Sara Beysolow Nyanti, the Minister of Foreign Affairs for Liberia, and we're here to talk about UN Security Council reform. So there are growing calls for, from African countries for permanent representation on the UN Security Council. This is not the first time we've heard calls for reform, but they seem particularly strong at the moment. Why do you think that is?
I think the time is right for the strong calls because many African countries have had different experiences that have led many of us to believe that the current configuration for global governance on peace and security is no longer fit for purpose. The needs of countries during conflict, post-conflict, for reconstruction are not being met in line with the expectations. And it's important that voices are heard. We talk about leaving no one behind. And if the countries that are affected don't feel they have adequate and just and equitable representation, then there's a problem.
Do you think that African countries should be given permanent seats on the Council? And if so, how would they be selected?
I know that they should be given permanent seats because Africa is the source of most of the resources of the world. And Africa is very critical to global governance, to multilateralism. You cannot have a rules-based world order that does not reflect all of the world's people adequately. So it needs to happen. And if permanent seats are selected, we have the African Union. The African Union will decide how the African Union is represented at the Security Council.
The U.S. has voiced support for giving 2 permanent seats to African countries, but without veto power. Without that power, wouldn't these roles largely be symbolic? Do you need the veto power to actually have strong influence on the Council?
First and foremost, we need a total overhaul. We need a total overhaul, and that means looking at overall the structure, the principles, looking overall at the functioning of the Security Council. And it's not just a matter of seats, but how will you be seated at the table? And it's not just a matter of speaking. Will you be heard at the table? It's not a matter of being heard. Will there be action at the table? So there's a lot to look at. And I think just talking about veto or non-veto is not the issue. It's about overhauling the entire system. I would like to be a part of a process that reviews the entire peacekeeping operation around the world. The systems we have today and the solutions and the tools were made back after World War II. I mean, they're not fit for purpose for the current world that we're living in. And I believe very, very strongly that we need to go back to the beginning, go back to the foundation, look at what's there and look at what needs to be totally overhauled and reformed.
So a lot of critics view the Security Council as effectively a paralyzed institution. When you look at crises like the wars in Gaza, Ukraine, critics would say that they've been unable to take substantive actions in response to conflicts like this. Do you think reform could help, going back to the drawing board as you described, could that help rebuild trust and legitimacy in the Security Council as an institution?
The UN needs to lead by example. And the UN needs to stand by the principles that it holds others accountable to. You can't be telling nations, least developed countries, developing countries, that they must be inclusive and that you must have equitable systems and all of these things where the highest body at the UN is very skewed in terms of who has a voice and who can say what happens around the world and then can choose not to live by what they're telling others to do. I'm sorry, it doesn't work anymore, and we need to be held accountable. All of us need to be held accountable, not only some of us.
I know you have a limited amount of time here, so thank you for being here with me today. I guess to wrap things up, look, we can talk about reform, but there are some very realistic or real obstacles to reform. What would you identify as the biggest obstacles, and how can they be overcome?
Imbalance of power. The big get bigger and the small get smaller. And until we all raise a voice together to find a balance, it's not going to change. And so for me, I think the important conversation to have is speaking truth to power and being able to speak truth to power in a way where we can hold people accountable and to say to those countries who feel that they're bigger than the rest of the world, it stops here. And we all need space. And if the space isn't big enough, make the space bigger.
Well, thank you for being here with us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.